Life on Earth's outer colonies had always been peaceful. In the distant reaches of space, humanity had built vast, thriving cities on other planets. The colonies were a symbol of human achievement, stretching across the stars, connected by trade, research, and mutual cooperation. For decades, humans had formed relationships with alien species, sharing knowledge and creating a sense of unity. It seemed that nothing could ever disturb this harmony. The colonies were full of life. Space stations orbited distant planets, connected by a web of communication. Farmers worked the soil on distant moons, while scientists pushed the boundaries of what was possible in research labs. Even on the most isolated worlds, people felt safe. The United Earth Federation, Earth's governing body, maintained a steady hand over the colonies, ensuring peace and prosperity. Yet, despite all the progress, there was a subtle tension in the air. It wasn't something most people could put their finger on, but something just didn't feel right. News from Earth seemed to grow more erratic, with occasional reports of strange movements from neighboring star systems. The Federation kept calm, dismissing these rumors as false alarms. After all, what could possibly threaten humanity's far-flung colonies? Still, the uneasy feeling lingered, especially among the commanders stationed at Earth's military outposts. They noticed unusual readings from deep space, faint signals, strange energy patterns. But again, these anomalies were dismissed. In the grand scheme of things, they were minor, easily explained away as natural space phenomena or issues with equipment. Everyone was too busy with their day-to-day tasks to worry about things they couldn't understand. On one quiet colony, situated on a small moon, orbiting a gas giant, life continued as usual. Children played in the streets, people went about their work, and the skies above were clear. But as the sun set and the stars began to twinkle in the distance, a faint hum filled the air, unnoticed by most. It was an odd sound, a vibration that seemed to pulse from deep in the darkness of space. If anyone had been paying attention, they might have felt a strange chill, like the feeling before a storm. But most didn't notice, and the routine continued. Then it happened. The first colony went dark without warning. The Federation received a garbled distress signal, but the transmission cut off before any useful information could be gathered. The transmission was nothing but static when the team tried to respond. Communication lines with that colony were completely severed. The Federation's intelligence officers scrambled to understand what was happening. It wasn't a natural disaster, no asteroid strikes, no solar flares, just a complete and sudden loss of contact. At first, Earth's leaders tried to downplay the event. They assured the public that everything was fine, that it was just a technical issue. But as hours passed, and then days, more colonies began to fall silent. One by one, the outposts across the outer rim of the galaxy reported strange occurrences, mysterious signals, sudden attacks, and bizarre mechanical failures. It was as if the colonies were being picked off, one by one, and no one could understand why. The atmosphere on Earth began to shift. News outlets went silent about the matter. But behind the scenes, military officials worked frantically to understand what was happening. Was it an alien invasion? A rogue faction of humans? Nobody knew, but the thought that something could be happening out there, beyond the safety of Earth's atmosphere, sent a cold shiver through humanity's leaders. Then a report came through that changed everything. The Federation's flagship, the Sovereign, had received visual confirmation of a fleet, an enormous fleet, approaching Earth's colonies. But this wasn't just any fleet. The ships were massive, their dark silhouettes blocking out the stars. The attackers were not human, and they weren't any race that Earth's military had encountered before. The first reaction was disbelief. How could such an advanced fleet appear without warning? Who were they, and why were they attacking humanity's colonies? The Federation scrambled to prepare, but it was already too late for the outer colonies. Earth's defenses were not prepared for this level of aggression. The first wave of attacks was devastating. Massive ships fired precise, Overwhelming blasts at the colonies. Structures crumbled, entire cities were destroyed, and hundreds of thousands of lives were lost in an instant. The communication lines were down, and the Federation could only watch helplessly as humanity's colonies were torn apart. A sense of dread filled Earth's leaders as they realized the truth. This wasn't just an attack. It was a war, and humanity was losing. The colonists, once thought safe in their distant homes, were now caught in the crossfire of an enemy they knew nothing about. In the face of this overwhelming threat, Earth's military commanders knew that they had to act fast. But there was one thing they lacked: an answer to this new enemy. They couldn't defeat an enemy they didn't understand. And the aliens, whatever they were, had an army unlike anything humanity had ever seen. As panic spread across Earth's governments, whispers began to circulate. It was time for the giants to step in. And so, the calm before the storm shattered, leaving only one question: could humanity's giants, the engineered warriors and towering mechs, be the key to turning the tide? The answer would soon be tested, but for now, Earth's fate hung in the balance. The reports that had begun filtering in from the colonies were becoming increasingly disturbing. The once thriving outer settlements, which had been bastions of human achievement, were now silent, their communication systems reduced to nothing but broken fragments of static. The Federation had dismissed the initial reports as mere technical malfunctions. After all, space was vast, and the colonies were far apart. But as the days passed, the situation worsened, and Earth's leadership could no longer ignore the mounting evidence that something far more serious was at play. Deep space sensors began to pick up unusual activity. A fleet of ships, unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. The sheer size of the vessels was staggering, and their advanced design suggested a technological sophistication far beyond what the Federation's best minds had predicted. The images sent back by the Federation's satellites were fuzzy at first, but as the alien fleet drew closer to the colonies, their nature became clear. The ships were enormous, their dark surfaces gleaming under the stars like ominous shadows. They were unlike any human-made spacecraft, sleek and menacing, with sharp, angular lines that seemed to reject the idea of peaceful exploration. The Federation's top analysts were stumped. These ships weren't from any known alien species with whom Earth had established communication. They seemed to appear from nowhere, like a dark storm descending on the horizon. For days, there was a silence that fell over Earth's government. The Federation's military officials were at a loss. Earth had always prided itself on its military strength, yet even with the most advanced weaponry and technologies, they had never encountered a threat on this scale. The outer colonies were among the best defended parts of human space, yet they were falling without a trace, one after another. The once boasting commanders of the Federation military were now asking one simple question: what were these invaders, and what did they want? As the Federation scrambled to understand the situation, more horrifying news came in from the colonies. The alien ships had descended upon the outer settlements like a wave, enveloping the colonies with surgical precision. The attacks were swift, and the damage was severe. But it wasn't just the physical destruction that left the Federation reeling. It was the mystery of the invaders' motives. There were no demands for surrender, no negotiations. The invaders didn't even communicate with the colonies. They simply arrived and began dismantling human defenses, leaving the colonists in fear, unsure of how to respond. The Federation's resources were spread thin across the galaxy, and there wasn't enough time to reinforce every colony. The leaders knew they were facing an enemy that didn't operate by any set of rules they had encountered before. At this moment of crisis, Earth's commanders realized they needed something more. Something stronger. Humanity had always relied on the strength of its soldiers, but this new enemy was unlike anything they had prepared for. It wasn't enough to simply have soldiers on the ground. They needed to bring something truly extraordinary into the fight. It was then that the Federation turned to the giants. These weren't just ordinary soldiers. These were humanity's ultimate weapon, designed for a time when only the most powerful force could hold back the tide of destruction. For years, the giants had been kept in reserve, their creation a closely guarded secret. They were massive, towering beings, part human, part machine, engineered for the sole purpose of defending humanity against the unimaginable. These giants were born from years of research into genetics, artificial intelligence, and advanced robotics. They stood several stories tall, their bodies made from a combination of human DNA and cybernetic enhancements. Their limbs were capable of lifting enormous weights, and their sensory systems were far more advanced than any human soldiers. They were strong, fast, and resilient, capable of enduring environments that would tear a normal human apart. In short, they were designed to face the impossible. The first of the giants, known as the Titan-class units, were deployed in response to the alien invasion. These massive beings, though still a handful in number, were the last line of defense for humanity. Their presence alone was meant to intimidate, to show the invaders that Earth would not go down without a fight. The Federation's military leaders scrambled to deploy the giants, but there was a problem. The alien fleet was already advancing at a rapid pace, and the colonies were being wiped out one by one. The giants, impressive as they were, couldn't be in every place at once. Each deployment required time and resources, and it was clear that Earth's colonies were vulnerable. As the giants prepared for their first mission, the tension on Earth grew. The pilots, who had been specially trained for years to control these towering warriors, were ready. They knew that they were humanity's best hope, but even they were filled with uncertainty. Could these giants really make a difference? Could they stand up to an enemy who had already devastated humanity's most advanced colonies? The first test would come soon enough. The Federation's strategy was simple: deploy the giants to the most threatened colonies and hope they could turn the tide. But the commanders couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread. Earth's outer colonies had always been the frontier, but now they were on the verge of being lost forever. The stakes were higher than ever, and the giants, humanity's last hope, were ready to step into the war. But even as the giants began to prepare, the truth was becoming clearer. Humanity's survival was no longer a certainty. The stakes had never been higher, and the clock was ticking. Earth's fate now lay in the hands of these enormous warriors, who would have to face an enemy that seemed as unstoppable as the very darkness of space itself. As the invasion continued to sweep across the colonies, the Federation had little choice but to place all their hopes in the hands of the giants. These enormous warriors, crafted from the finest advancements in genetic engineering and robotics, were humanity's last line of defense. The engineers and scientists who had worked tirelessly to develop them were now watching with bated breath, knowing that the success or failure of their creation could determine the future of humanity. The giants were not just soldiers, they were the result of decades of research, a mix of human ingenuity and cutting-edge technology. Each giant was a towering figure, many times larger than an average human, with a strong exoskeleton made from advanced alloys. These suits weren't just armor. They were powerful systems in their own right, capable of enhanced strength, speed, and durability. Their senses were augmented far beyond any humans, allowing them to see, hear, and react to their surroundings with incredible precision. Every movement was controlled by a pilot inside, a specially trained soldier who had spent years mastering the complex machinery that powered the giants. Despite the immense power they possessed, the pilots inside the giants weren't invincible. They had to work in perfect sync with their machines, anticipating each move, adjusting their tactics in real time. The pressure was overwhelming. Each pilot knew they were stepping into a battle that would not only test their abilities but would determine the fate of entire colonies, if not the future of humanity itself. The first group of giants, equipped with the most advanced technology the Federation had, was ready for deployment. The team gathered in the command center, a nerve-wracking silence hanging in the air as the final checks were made. The generals and commanders stood in a quiet corner, discussing the strategy that would carry humanity's greatest hopes. It was clear that time was running out, and this would be their only opportunity to make a difference. There was no room for error. The decision was made to deploy the giants to the most critical battlefronts, the colonies that had suffered the worst of the enemy's attacks. They were the last holdouts, the final line of defense before Earth itself might be targeted. The giants would arrive as a symbol of hope, as well as a show of force. The Federation knew that they had to act quickly, but they also understood that a misstep could result in disaster. As the first batch of giants lumbered towards their assigned colonies, their massive frames casting shadows over the barren landscapes, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. The engineers who had worked on them for so long watched anxiously, knowing that this moment was more than just a military operation. It was the culmination of a dream. For many of them, the giants were the product of a lifetime's work, their greatest contribution to humanity's survival. For the soldiers, it was the realization that they were about to face an enemy like no other, with nothing but their strength and determination to protect their people. When the first giant touched down on the colony, the reaction was instant. The ground shook as the enormous Mech landed, its powerful feet leaving deep impressions in the soil. The pilot inside, a young woman named Captain Sarah Nova, had spent years training for this very moment. Her heartbeat quickened as she activated the giant's systems, her fingers flying over the controls. Every movement of the giant mirrored her own, an intricate dance between human and machine. The first few steps were hesitant, as she adapted to the weight and scale of the machine. But soon, the giant moved with fluid precision. The colony, once a bustling hub of human activity, was now eerily silent. The air was thick with dust and smoke, the remnants of buildings reduced to rubble. As Sarah surveyed the area, she saw the remnants of humanity's fight. Structures that had once been filled with life were now hollow shells, destroyed by the relentless advance of the invaders. There was no sign of the enemy yet, but Sarah knew they were close. The quiet before the storm always felt the most dangerous. With a deep breath, Sarah began her advance. The giant's massive legs powered through the debris, each step a resounding thud. She moved toward the center of the colony, where the Federation's defense line had once been stationed. The other giants followed, their movements synchronized as they formed a protective perimeter around the area. It was a show of strength, but also of hope. If humanity was going to survive, this was their moment to prove it. As they neared the center, the first sign of the enemy appeared. Out of the corner of her eye, Sarah saw a flicker, a flash of light against the darkening sky. She turned the giant towards it, her heart racing. There, emerging from the shadows, were the invaders' ships, their sleek forms cutting through the smoke like predators on the hunt. Their weapons glowed ominously as they powered up, targeting the giants in the distance. But Sarah didn't hesitate. With a steady hand, she guided the giant forward, engaging the enemy head-on. The giant's massive fists swung through the air, striking with precision as it clashed against the incoming threat. The battle had begun, and there was no turning back. The giants would have to prove themselves against an unknown enemy, one that had already shown they were capable of wiping out entire colonies without a second thought. In the midst of the chaos, as Sarah fought with everything she had, she couldn't help but wonder, would the giants be enough? Could these towering machines, built for the sole purpose of defense, turn the tide of war and protect humanity? Or was this just the beginning of an even greater struggle, one that would test the limits of human endurance and spirit? For now, all she could do was focus on the mission at hand and hope that the giants would live up to their legacy. The battle for the outer colonies had intensified beyond anyone's expectations. The Federation's hope rested on the shoulders of the giants, but even with these towering warriors deployed to the front lines, the conflict was far from over. Despite their impressive strength, at first, the invaders had relied on their ships, launching powerful energy beams and deploying automated drones to harass the giants from the air. But it wasn't long before they realized that the giants' defenses were far more sophisticated than they had expected. The mechs, though massive and imposing, were also incredibly agile, capable of dodging and countering the invaders' strikes with incredible speed. As the invaders' ships retreated to regroup, they began to send down ground forces, smaller, highly mobile units that moved like shadows across the landscape. They were fast and elusive, striking with precision before vanishing into the terrain, making it difficult for the giants to track them. These new units were equipped with advanced cloaking technology, allowing them to remain unseen as they approached their targets. The giants, however, were not easily deterred. The pilots inside their hulking exoskeletons were trained to work with their machines in a way that allowed them to compensate for the enemy's tactics. They relied not only on strength but on strategy. Sarah Nova, the pilot of the first Titan-class giant, had been trained for situations like this. She knew that the key to winning was adaptability. With each new wave of invaders, the giants adjusted. Sarah's Titan, for example, had been fitted with enhanced radar systems designed to detect even the faintest movement in the surrounding environment. It wasn't long before they discovered that the enemy was using a form of energy that disrupted the usual methods of tracking. The invaders weren't just attacking with conventional weapons. They were playing a deeper game, using technology that interfered with the giants' ability to detect their movements. Realizing that they needed to rethink their strategy, the Federation commanders called for a temporary retreat. The giants would fall back to a safe distance, while engineers worked on modifying their systems to counter the new technology. The retreat was a necessary move, but it carried with it a sense of frustration. The commanders knew they couldn't afford to give the invaders any more ground. The colonies that had survived the initial wave were now in danger of being overrun if the giants couldn't adjust quickly enough. As Sarah and the other pilots waited for the modifications to be completed, they found themselves questioning their place in this conflict. They had always known the giants would face challenges, but they had expected those challenges to come from the physical prowess of their enemies, not from technological warfare. The longer they stayed on the front lines, the more. As the giants continued their advance, Sarah's Titan-class unit led the charge, its massive form cutting through the invaders' defenses. The ground shook beneath their feet as they clashed, but there was a new sense of hope on the battlefield. The giants had proven themselves capable of holding their own against the invaders, and now they had a real chance to turn the tide. The battle raged on, but with each passing moment, it was clear that humanity had found its strength once again. The giants, once a symbol of desperation, had become the hope for the future. And though the road ahead was uncertain, Sarah knew one thing for sure. Humanity was not ready to give up the fight. As the war between humanity and the invaders stretched on, it became evident that the battle was far from over. While the giants had shown their strength and resilience, the invaders had proven just as resourceful, adapting their tactics and technology with every skirmish. Despite the new advancements in the giants' systems, the alien forces still had an upper hand in terms of numbers and sheer unpredictability. With each passing day, Earth's colonies were pushed further toward the brink of annihilation. Sarah Nova, piloting the Titan-class giant, couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. She and her fellow pilots had grown accustomed to their towering machines, their actions becoming second nature as they moved in perfect synchronization with their mechs. But as the days dragged on, doubt began to settle in their hearts. How many more battles could the giants win? How many more colonies could they save? It wasn't just the giants that were facing immense strain. It was the people of the Federation, the citizens of the colonies who had started to feel the full effects of the conflict. Supplies were running low. Reinforcements were becoming harder to come by. The infrastructure of many colonies had been decimated. People lived in constant fear, uncertain of what each new day would bring. And still, the invaders pressed forward, their ships casting a dark shadow over humanity's hope for survival. In the heart of the Federation Command Center, the leaders were grappling with the mounting pressure. The giants had become humanity's last hope, yet they knew they couldn't continue relying solely on these massive machines. They needed a strategy that would not only push back the invaders, but also offer a path forward, a way to reclaim the lost colonies and restore peace. The Federation decided it was time to take a risk. something bold and unexpected. They would send the giants on a mission deep behind enemy lines, into the heart of the invaders' territory, in an attempt to disrupt their command structure. It was a dangerous plan, but it was the only way they saw to give humanity a fighting chance. Sarah and the other Titan-class pilots received their orders. The mission would require them to travel through uncharted territory, facing unknown dangers in order to infiltrate the invaders' central command. If they could succeed, they might be able to cripple the invaders' ability to coordinate their forces. If they failed, however, it could mean the end of the war and of humanity's presence in space. As Sarah prepared her Titan for the mission, she reflected on the long journey that had brought her to this moment. She had once dreamed of exploring the stars, of forging new frontiers for humanity. But now, every decision she made carried the weight of her entire species' survival. The battle was no longer about expanding humanity's reach into the cosmos. It was about holding on to what they had fought so hard to build. The loss of the outer colonies had been devastating, but if they could stop the invaders here, they could prevent the destruction from reaching Earth itself. The journey to the invaders' stronghold was perilous. The giants moved in stealth as much as their massive frames could manage, avoiding detection as they navigated through the unknown regions of space. The stars above them, once a symbol of hope, now felt cold and distant. Every moment was a reminder of the stakes they faced as the giants pressed onward into enemy territory, each step bringing them closer to their target and to danger. Along the way, Sarah and the other pilots encountered pockets of the enemy, each more unpredictable than the last. The invaders seemed to be everywhere, their forces more widespread than the Federation had initially realized. Yet every encounter brought new insights. They learned more about their enemy's technology, their tactics, and most importantly, their weaknesses. The giants, though few in number, were still humanity's greatest asset, and each engagement provided valuable data that could help tip the scales in their favor. As they neared the invaders' stronghold, the tension was palpable. The Titans' massive forms had become a symbol of hope for humanity, but Sarah knew that even the giants could be vulnerable in the heart of enemy territory. Their path was fraught with challenges. Every move had to be calculated, every strategy fine-tuned. The stakes were no longer just about defeating the invaders. They had to disrupt their very infrastructure, shake the foundation of their command, and show them that humanity would never surrender. When they finally reached the heart of the invaders' stronghold, the gravity of the mission became clear. It wasn't just a military target. It was the nerve center of the entire invasion. Deep within this structure lay the core of the enemy's power, their central command. If they could breach the defenses and disable this command center, they would cripple the invaders' ability to coordinate their efforts and potentially turn the tide of the entire conflict. But as Sarah and the others prepared to launch their final assault, they realized they were not alone. The invaders had anticipated their move. They had laid traps, hidden defenses, and placed more advanced units in strategic locations. The mission had become a race against time, with the fate of humanity hanging in the balance. For Sarah, this was the moment that would define her legacy. The towering machine she piloted was more than just a weapon. It was a symbol of humanity's spirit. It was a representation of their determination to fight for their place in the stars. With each step forward, she felt the weight of her ancestors' dreams, the hopes of every colonist, and the future of humanity itself pressing down on her. This was not just a mission to destroy the invaders. It was a mission to reclaim humanity's future. Every second counted, and with each new obstacle, Sarah found herself more resolute. They had come too far to turn back now. The giants had been built to face the impossible, and now they would show the invaders that humanity, no matter how small, would never be defeated. As the Titans began their final charge into the heart of the enemy stronghold, Sarah whispered a silent vow, to herself, to her fellow pilots, and to every soul still fighting for survival across the colonies. No matter what happened next, humanity would never give up. The final charge into the heart of the invaders' stronghold was unlike any battle Sarah had ever faced. The terrain was unlike anything the giants had encountered before. Alien, hostile, and alienating in its stark, cold design. It was a place of precision and calculation, where every wall, every corner seemed crafted to keep intruders out. The air was thick with the hum of foreign technology, and the ground beneath their massive feet seemed to tremble with the weight of centuries of alien conquest. Sarah's Titan-class giant led the charge, its heavy footfalls resonating through the alien landscape. The air around them crackled with the energy from the invaders' defenses, their weapons prepared for anything that came their way. Yet even as the giants closed in, something felt different this time. There was an eerie silence that hung in the air, as though the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting to see if humanity would finally reach the tipping point. The invaders had clearly anticipated their arrival. As the Titans moved deeper into the stronghold, a series of energy barriers sprang to life, encircling them and blocking their path. These energy fields shimmered in the dim light, like invisible walls that could easily deflect any attack. The Federation had expected some resistance, but this level of preparedness was unlike anything they had encountered before. The invaders were no longer reacting. They were anticipating, and they were one step ahead. The first Titan-class mech, piloted by Sarah, stepped forward, its massive arm extending toward the energy shield. The powerful exoskeleton hummed as it charged, preparing to unleash a wave of energy that would disrupt the shield's integrity. Yet before Sarah could release the energy blast, a high-pitched sound echoed through the air, a signal, perhaps, that the invaders had anticipated their move once again. Suddenly, the energy barriers began to shift, reorganizing themselves and forming a labyrinth of ever-changing shields. The Titans were trapped, their movements limited as they tried to navigate the maze-like structure. Every step forward seemed to be met with an obstacle, a new energy barrier or advanced defense that slowed their progress. The situation had become increasingly dire, and for the first time, Sarah felt a surge of uncertainty. Could they overcome these new defenses, or were they doomed to be trapped in this hostile place forever? But Sarah wasn't one to give in to fear. With a steady hand, she ordered the Titan to shift tactics. Instead of focusing on brute force, they would need to outsmart their enemies, just as they had done before. She focused on the subtle changes in the energy patterns around her, how they pulsed and fluctuated. There had to be a weakness in this elaborate web of shields, a moment when they would flicker or weaken. The other Titan pilots, following Sarah's lead, began to do the same. The Titans moved with greater precision, working in tandem to analyze the invaders' defenses. Every giant was focused on a different aspect of the shield network, testing its limits and searching for an opening. The coordination between them was flawless. Despite the challenges, Sarah had the confidence that the Titans could overcome this, together. After what felt like hours of trying and testing, Sarah's Titan found the pattern. The energy shields, though complex, were powered by a central node located deep within the stronghold. The shields, while seemingly impenetrable, were merely extensions of the power core's energy. If they could disable the core, the shields would fall, and they would have a clear path forward. With renewed determination, Sarah and the other pilots set their course toward the central node. Their Titans moved swiftly, avoiding the shifting energy barriers as they converged on the heart of the invaders' stronghold. As they neared the core, the atmosphere thickened. The air seemed to vibrate with power, and the walls around them were adorned with strange symbols, alien designs that pulsed with an otherworldly glow. Sarah had no idea what they meant, but she understood one thing. They had reached the core of the invaders' power. It was time to act. The Titans surrounded the central node, their massive hands extending toward it as they prepared to disable the power source. The core was heavily protected, surrounded by a series of energy barriers that flickered and shifted. It was clear that the invaders were not going to let them disable it without a fight. But Sarah and the other pilots had come too far to turn back now. With a final, synchronized move, the Titans launched their attack. A surge of energy crackled through the air as their weapons discharged, aimed directly at the core. The energy shields around the node began to falter, their power waning under the combined assault. It was a risky move, but it was their only chance. The core resisted, its energy flickering wildly as though fighting back against the giant's strike. For a moment, it seemed as though the invaders had built it to be invulnerable, but Sarah refused to relent. She knew that this was the moment of truth. If they couldn't destroy the core now, there might be no going back. As the Titans poured their energy into the core, a massive shockwave erupted, sending tremors through the entire stronghold. The walls trembled, and the shields around the core flickered and finally collapsed. It wasn't over yet, but the invaders had been dealt a heavy blow. The heart of their power was weakening, and humanity's chance to win this war had never been clearer. The Titans stood firm, their massive frames towering over the now unprotected core. Sarah's heart raced as she watched the core destabilize, the alien technology faltering in the face of humanity's relentless determination. The invaders' once unassailable fortress was crumbling, and the Federation's victory, once distant and uncertain, was now within reach. As the core finally shattered, sending a wave of energy through the stronghold, Sarah took a moment to breathe. The battle was not over, but this victory was significant. They had broken the heart of the invaders' power, and humanity now had a chance to push them back, to reclaim what was theirs. In that moment, Sarah realized that it wasn't just the giants that were important. It was the unity of humanity that had made this possible. The Federation, despite its struggles, had found its strength not just in the machines they had built, but in the people who piloted them, in the soldiers who fought, and in the citizens who refused to surrender. They had proven that, no matter how overwhelming the odds, humanity could always rise to meet the challenge. And as Sarah watched the remnants of the invaders' stronghold crumble before her, she knew one thing for sure: humanity would never give up, no matter the cost.